ever considered that we are living in a unique time, that something world-changing is about to happen, and that it might concern you? If so, you're in the right place. Keep listening, and you'll hear thought-provoking views behind the news that point to a new and better future for all. Many people now sense that humanity is not alone. So consider this. If the Christ or the Buddha walked among us today as modern men, would we recognize them? What would they be saying? And most importantly, would we listen? Every Sunday on this program, Share International Radio, we'll examine extraordinary events that are unfolding behind the headline news. This may be the message of hope you've been waiting for. And now, welcome to this week's show.
Hello, welcome to the 40th episode of Share on the Air Radio North America. My name is Cielito Pascual. I am podcasting from Seattle, Washington, and I want to thank you for tuning in today. On every episode of Share on the Air Radio, I or my co-host, Diana Gold-Holland, present an aspect of an extraordinary, seemingly implausible story that the Christ, the Buddha, the Messiah, the Krishna, the Imam Mahdi are names for one and the same person, and that person is already in the world, appearing to ordinary people and world leaders alike. And every guest that we've had on the show so far is as equally convinced as we are of the relevance of this story to many of the dramatic unfolding events in the world today. And for today's show, our guest is me. My co-host Diana suggested that we try something different, that we as hosts actually share our personal experience of being involved, paying attention to, sharing with the public this story that we call the Emergence of Maitreya, the world teacher, and the masters of wisdom. I consider myself to be a very ordinary person. I don't much like to talk about myself. I prefer to have guests so they can talk about themselves and I can ask them all the questions. And I am willing to share because my involvement spans 28 years, almost to the date, since I first heard this story from Mr. Benjamin Creme. And certainly in that time span, many things have happened in the world. And I may have something of value to share. So hopefully what I share will not only be in and of itself this message of hope, but I hope my conviction offers some hope. I'm not trying to convince anyone to believe in this story. Diana doesn't do that. That's not the spirit in which she's committed to this podcast. However, both of us, I think I can speak for her and myself. I know her dedication. We are interested in reaching people who want to hear a message of hope. So that's the spirit in which I'm sharing my experience for what it is. I can start with sharing how a lot of times we want to know how'd you grow up? What'd you believe in? Well, I am one of two daughters of immigrants to this country. My parents are from the Philippines. I don't see my parents as being incredibly devout, but we certainly went to a Catholic church growing up. And I would say I adopted a mystical view of Catholicism, much like my mother's, which this work naturally has those, that there's a mystical aspect and a very practical aspect to the information of Maitreya and the Masters of Wisdom that attracts me very much. And for those of you who are listening for the first time, I will share that we have 3 points that we want to get across, just so you get oriented. If you're hearing this for the first time, again, as I said, this is about the 40th show we've done. You can visit our page at shareontheairradio.org to get to the list of all the shows that we've done, or you can visit our Facebook page, Share on the Air North America. And we'll have links there at the top where you can see a list of all the topics of our shows. But essentially, what we want to convey on this show is 3 things. 1, that humanity has never been alone. We are never, ever alone. 2, we have help of an extraordinary kind. And that is the help from the eldest brothers and sisters of humanity who are in the process of a gradual public emergence, an emergence that's speeding up with every passing day, of Maitreya, the world teacher, and the masters of wisdom. And 3, the solutions to the world's greatest challenges are within our grasp through the principle, the very spiritual principle of sharing. So, my experience with paying attention to this story, that many are calling the greatest story of all time, has endured through many great world changes that I've been able to experience just being a human on this planet. But I lived for many years in New York City. I am living now in Seattle, seeing many, many changes happening to this day. And my understanding of this story of Maitreya, the world teacher, has helped me to have a certain kind of emotional poise and groundedness with all the great things that are happening in the world and all the less great things. So let's start from the beginning. 28 years ago was 1988. And at that time, I got my news from network television. Network television, you know, Dan Rather and Tom Brokaw and Peter Jennings. I was reading the newspaper, listening to the radio. You know, personal computers were around, but these were like special kinds of equipment that only very techie people used. So that's how I got my information. It wasn't social media. I didn't have a smartphone in my pocket with access to what was going on. Politically, Germany was divided between East and West by the Berlin Wall. Nelson Mandela was expected to live out the rest of his life in prison. The Soviet Union and its hold on the Eastern Bloc countries in Europe was changing, but still intact. And in July of 1988, I was living in New York City, having escaped what I considered to be the doldrums of my hometown, Seattle. And I was listening to talk radio then. I was probably as obsessed with talk radio as I am with social media today. And I would listen to anything. And I happened to be listening to a show, and the announcer said, coming up next, we have a man who claims the Christ is already in the world and living in London. Now, the moment I heard that, my ears just pricked up, because I knew that was the story I was waiting to hear, and I'll explain why. I just knew it in my bones. From a very young age, I had a kind of fixation on the notion of the return of the Christ. As I said, being in the Catholic Church, I was drawn to the mystical aspect of that. And so the return of the Christ was very mysterious to me. And I have a memory of I must have been 3 or 4 years old, and I was washing up for lunchtime at home. I wasn't in school yet. So I could barely reach the bathroom faucet, and I'm washing my hands. I must have been mesmerized by the water and the soap flowing over my hands, and I started to make up a song. And the little song was about the Christ coming back. I was just making it up. And I don't think I said Christ. I think I was just singing, He's coming back, He's coming back. And I remember my mother in the other room, you know, I guess I was so into it. She said, "What are you singing?" And I said, "Nothing." So from that time, there was something. And years forward, when I was 11 years old, there was a movie entitled Oh God. If you've been around as long as I have, you might remember that. It starred the legendary comedian George Burns, who at that point was the age of 80, and he played God. He appeared as an ordinary, wisecracking old guy who picks an unassuming grocery manager to tell the world about his message. And he dressed in khaki pants and a windbreaker and sneakers, this God. And I was fascinated by that, the idea that God could appear as an ordinary man. I love that film. And that notion stayed with me. And I'll keep talking until I hear the break music. Thank you, OMTimes, for this platform. As I got older, I just had a sense. Now, we're moving into the 80s, my adolescence. Anyone remembers the 80s? It was a bleak time. There was good times, and there was a kind of specter of nuclear annihilation. You know, there was the Cold War. It was at this pitch, and there was this dread that, you know, missiles would be going off at some point, and we'd be up in a nuclear cloud. And I will continue my story. But at that time, I still had I had a sense that somehow the time was special, that we were in a very unique, hopeful time, despite that sense of dread that a lot of people felt. And I will continue after the break. I'm happy to share my story here on the Air Radio.
Your conscious connection to a more mindful world. OMTimes Radio. IOM FM.
Spiritual, metaphysical, green living, psychic, alternative healing, life coaching. Do any of these or similar terms apply to your business or cause? If so, you are in a niche market with a very specific audience. Conscious Gate PR is the world's leading conscious public relations agency. With a global reach of over 4 million and growing, we offer comprehensive media campaigns to our targeted market. Learn more at ConsciousGatePR.com. Conscious marketing for conscious minds.
Join Vibe Nation radio host, international psychic medium Carrie Turcotte, as she guides her listeners to rediscover themselves by accessing the keys of knowledge that already exist within. Each week's show is divinely orchestrated to intertwine with the universal energies, allowing the listeners to go deeper within. At the end of each show, Carrie will tap into the energies of the listeners and give a message from Spirit about the upcoming week. If you really want to get to know who you truly are, join Carrie each Monday at 3 p.m. on Vibe Nation Radio.
Want to help build the coming golden age? Want to experience the Aquarian energies of love, light, and power? Transmission meditation is a simple way for you and 2 or more friends to do just that and accelerate your own spiritual growth at the same time. Check out transmission meditation at shareontheairradio.org. That's shareontheairradio.org.
I didn't know it would be so hard. It's easier to heal others than to heal myself.
If you or someone you know has a drug or alcohol problem, you are not alone.
Recovery was the hardest job I ever had, and the most important.
For information and treatment referral, call 1-800-662-HELP. Brought to you by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services.
And we're back on Share on the Air Radio. My name is Cielito Pascual, sharing my story, how the ring of truth resounds to this day. The ring of truth of the story of Maitreya, the world teacher, and the masters of wisdom. So I was exploring a lot of information in my younger years. And in the 80s, a lot of popular information was the channeled publications, the New Age authors who were publishing all these books on channeling, and I read a fair share of them. Looking back, they were really lightweight stuff, I have to say. And so by the time that I was living in New York City, listening to talk radio and hearing this man announce that their next guest claims Christ is in the world, I hear that, and I knew that that was the information I was looking for. The man who was being introduced as the guest was the British author and esotericist Benjamin Creme. And the whole, I will explain, this podcast is based on the information that has come out of Mr. Creme's work, Benjamin Creme, C-R-E-M-E, his work as chief editor of Share International magazine, and from 12.5 books that he has written. At that time, I had no idea who he was. But I was about to hear an interview that was probably, over the many, many years of Mr. Creme's work, it was probably one of the worst interviews he had ever done. The talk show host was considered to be, one of the big names in New York City. He was a conservative talk show host, very acerbic, very combative. Probably the last place you'd want to hear a topic, you'd expect to hear the topic about the emergence of the Christ being in London. But nonetheless, I'm listening. I'm in rapt attention. And Mr. Creme is describing Maitreya and how he is here to inspire humanity to remake the world through the spiritual principle of sharing. And he's presenting a very compelling vision for this extraordinary future. And I was just stunned, and I remembered thinking, my God, he's really on the wrong show, so let me call in and express my support. And I got on the air, and I said, I really hope what you're saying is true. And at that moment, the host, God, he just turned on Mr. Creme, and he said, you don't actually believe this, do you? Which was a remarkable statement to make. The host was threatened that that Mr. Creme actually believed what he was saying. That just shows the New York cynicism right there. And from that moment on, he just heaped insult after insult onto Mr. Creme, and I'm just marveling, like, whoa, how does he withstand this? What's going to happen? They are almost into fisticuffs, and Mr. Creme finally threatens to leave. And it was very uncomfortable to hear. And finally, Mr. Creme says to the host, one day you will be on your knees apologizing to me. And the host practically roared in umbrage, and he said, apologize? Why should I apologize to you? And Mr. Creme very calmly replied, because you're a decent man. And the whole quality of that show turned around. The memory of that, the memory of the grace with which Mr. Creme handled that was one of three things that at least told me the quality of the messenger was very high. It turns out that Mr. Creme was speaking the next day at a lecture on Central Park West, and that lecture was no less dramatic than the radio show I had just heard. There were Christian fundamentalists protesting. As Mr. Creme started to give his presentation, they would shout out, interrupting him, and it was disruptive until one of the volunteers stepped forward and said, please extend the courtesy to Mr. Creme, who's a guest in our town, the courtesy that you would expect if you were a guest in someone's home. And that disarmed the protesters, and there was about a dozen of them filling an entire row. They were all dressed in white. They stood up and they walked out. So I heard more details in Mr. Krem's presentation about the emergence of Maitreya and the Masters of Wisdom. Maitreya, the eldest brother of humanity and also a great avatar of the planet. I hear again about the urgency with which we need to abolish all hunger. And I hear the ways in which Maitreya will inspire the divinity within humanity to come forward and make that abolishment of hunger entirely possible. So despite all those interruptions, I stayed, and at intermission, that was the second thing that I saw, just the way that disruption was handled. The third thing I saw happened at intermission, and I was at the book tables. One of the protesters, fundamentalist protesters, was still there and was talking with one of the volunteers behind the book table in the back, one of the organizers of the lecture. And what struck me was that they were in dialogue. They were sharing. There was a patience displayed by both of them, listening and sharing, and there was this comfortable back and forth. It wasn't one person trying to impose their ideas on another. And that was like when you go to a restaurant and you peek into the kitchen and you see the chef and the staff are happy, you're happy. You know the food's going to be good. It tells you something. So that was like peeking into the kitchen of a restaurant. Like, who are the people involved in this, and what is their, who are they? What is their level of integrity? And the volunteer who was speaking to this young Christian fundamentalist turned out to be a woman by the name of Carol Joy, who influenced me tremendously. She was the chief editor, New York editor, rather, of Share International magazine. Visit share-international.org. She was a renowned educator, very involved in this work of sharing this information, and an extraordinary woman who's no longer with us. And she inspired me because she was an extraordinary speaker. So that told me, I was just so moved by all the information I heard and I learned, and I told me there was something to it. If it could attract this quality of people, there's something to it. I was so excited. I shared it with my friends, people who were closest to me. They looked at me and said, "How do you know it's not a cult?" That wasn't the response I was expecting, because I was so happy. I remember after hearing that talk show, that terrible talk show with the insulting host, whose name, by the way, is Bob Grant, legendary talk show host in New York City, no longer with us. He passed on in 2013. Benjamin Krem is still with us. After I heard that talk show, even though it was so disruptive, I was jumping literally up and down for joy in my apartment in Brooklyn. I knew that was the story I wanted to hear. We're going to have a break coming up. I'm going to talk about events that could have challenged my conviction about this, such as the AIDS epidemic, 9/11. But just to finish my thought about sharing this with friends and having them say, "How do you know this isn't a cult?" It actually made me very uncomfortable. And I went to look at some of the books. On this show, we interview people who are students of the Ageless Wisdom Teachings. That means they are students of many books, including the books of Alice Bailey. She was the predecessor to Benjamin Krem, also working closely with one of the Masters of Wisdom, Alice A. Bailey, Bailey. She wrote the book, The Reappearance of the Christ, plus 24 other books about the relationship between humanity and the masters of wisdom and the great plan for humanity. I went to the East West bookstore in Manhattan on Fifth Avenue, went to find her books, and I found them, and I was so dismayed because they were not like the books I was used to, the popular New Agey books. They were very just bland, flat, blue cover with text, and you open the book, no pictures, and I could see that, oh, there's discipline and rigor and study involved here. If I were to accept this information, this is the information I would be delving into. It is not light, New Agey stuff. This is serious study. And so I had a bit of a crisis of confidence of like, well, what do I know to be true? In the preface of Alice Bailey's books, the master says, if this has a resonance of truth, then continue studying. If it doesn't, let it go. There's no requirement of belief. Belief is an illusion. So I decided that I would act as if the story was true. I would view what's happening in the world as if the story was true, as if it's true that Christ, Buddha, Messiah, Krishna, Imam Mahdi were one and the same person. That person was in the world appearing to ordinary people and world leaders. Let's just pretend it's true. If it's not true, it will fall away like all the other New Age dross that I, would pick up and read and then get bored with. If it wasn't real, it would just fall away. That was 28 years ago. It hasn't fallen away yet. Next segment, we'll talk about challenges to understanding this story and how I explored the world to see how this story is demonstrating what's happening in this world. Stay tuned. ShareOnTheAirRadio.org.
Free your mind. Expand your soul. OMTimes Radio. IOM-FM.
There is no death, only a change of worlds. Chief Seattle. Deborah Livingston is an award-winning intuitive psychic medium whose international services include mediumship, spiritual assessment, animal communication, and spiritual mentoring. She is a published author and a trained shaman. Deborah provides evidential messages from spirit and departed loved ones. Learn more at deblivemedium.com. That's DEBLIV medium.com.
Have you bought into the idea that you have to work hard for your money, that business is hard? I will share some dynamic access consciousness tools to get you out of your own way so you can create a business that actually succeeds. Join me, Simone Millisers, on The Joy of Business at 4 p.m. Mondays Eastern.
The Awakening of Humanity by Benjamin Creme is a concise, prophetic book about momentous changes soon to occur. It focuses on an unprecedented event, the emergence into full public life of Maitreya, the world teacher. Download the book free online. Visit shareontheairradio.org. That's shareontheairradio.org. shareontheairradio.org.
Hi, this is Christina Ricci with RAIN. Every 2 minutes, another American is sexually assaulted. If you or someone you know has been sexually assaulted, you are not alone. Help is just a call or click away through the National Sexual Assault Hotline. Please call 1-800-656-HOPE, that's HOPE, or visit RAIN.org, that's RAINN.org.
Brought to you by RAIN and this station.
Welcome back to Share on the Air Radio, and I am Cielito Pascual in Seattle, Washington, continuing to share my story of 28 years of paying attention to, following, sharing, acting on, investigating this story that many are calling the biggest story of all time. That the Christ, Buddha, Messiah, Krishna, Imam Mahdi has returned and is among us. When I got involved. After attending the first lecture of hearing Benjamin Creme, I got involved immediately with transmission meditation. And we talk about that on the show all the time, transmissionmeditation.org. There's a video there. In fact, on our Facebook page, we'll post videos of Benjamin Creme so you can experience what I experienced in hearing his lectures. And subsequent to that first lecture, I don't know how many lectures might I have heard of Benjamin Creme since that time, at least 2.5 dozen, if not more. We have many videos, excerpts from lectures that you will find absolutely compelling, even spellbinding, very educational, very insightful. So I practiced transmission meditation, joined a group in Manhattan, and you know, I was so spiritually selfish. And I remember thinking, this is just an aside, but I want to talk about spiritual selfishness. When I heard about transmission meditation, I thought, oh, I wonder if there's any famous people who do transmission meditation. All these years, I've never met a famous person doing transmission meditation. Everyone involved in this work is very ordinary people, very smart people. People who, had they taken a different course in life, could have been household names, or at least leading figures in their field, could have lived comfortably, could have lived with renown and awards from their peers. I'll start with Benjamin Creme. He's an extraordinary artist. Had he chosen not to share the information of the reappearance of the Christ, it was his choice. He was presented with a choice. He was not made to do it. And had he chosen differently, his artwork, he's a painter, a very extraordinary painter. His artwork would be in the major museums around the world today. And he knew that when he chose to set aside personal ambition to present a story where he would not be paid for all the time that he lectured throughout Europe, in Japan, throughout North America. Never paid. He's not paid for the books that are published. The money just goes to publishing more books. But there's not just him. There are many people involved, very dedicated, who inspire me. People who've been awarded Fulbright scholarships. People who have interacted with world leaders, working very simply and humbly at getting this story out, year after year after year. And as a result of this very modest effort, grassroots, there are multiple millions of people who know this story to be true. This story has probably reached at least 100 million people. And a smaller proportion of that number are people who accept the possibility that this must be true, this might be true, tens of millions. And people who are convinced that it's true likely number in the multiple millions. But the people who are speaking out, sharing, actively committed, day in, day out, are far fewer in number. And if you are someone who knows this story, has known about it for a long time, believes in the story at least, let's say, maybe you believe in 30% of the story. And if you haven't shared this story with anyone in the past week, 2 weeks, 2 months, 2 years, I encourage you to think about someone right now who you could share this story with. Share any of the links that you'll find on the Facebook page of Share on the Air Radio. North America. Send them to one friend, send them to 2 friends, 3 friends. Just say, I'd love to know your opinion on this. What do you think? You don't have to explain it to them or convince them of it. Just ask them what they think. And just the very act of sharing the information and having another person's attention on the story with a curious mind adds to the climate of hope that all of us involved in this are working to generate in the world, because we need it. The world is in peril. There's no question. This is not airy-fairy stuff. We're pretty serious about it. I try not to take myself too seriously. So I share that with you. I'm a little off script here. But getting back on script, my experience. When I first got involved in paying attention to this work, Maitreya was releasing forecast. We have a show on this entitled Historic World Events and the Startling Predictions of Maitreya. This is the May 22nd show of Share on the Air radio. Our guest is Mark Gregory. We talk about Maitreya's predictions. Those were being released when I first got involved back in 1988. The forecast that struck me was this. And it was released the same month as the first observation of World AIDS Day. Maitreya has said that even people with AIDS will be healed through prayer and through the practice of honesty of mind, sincerity of spirit, and detachment. And in an earlier prediction, Maitreya had said that people will be healed through the practice of prayer. The process has already begun, and although individual instances have not, quote, hit the news as yet, people will begin to talk about their experiences in this regard. Cases of healing through prayer will become known publicly. If anyone remembers that time, in the late 80s, HIV was very nearly a death sentence. AIDS was decimating communities in the major cities, and especially in New York City, where I was living. The specter of that disease was darkening. It was a very troubling time. And I was inspired by that forecast, and I said, I'm going to find someone who's experienced healing. Perhaps they've even experienced Maitreya. And within about 8 months, I had written an article and submitted it to Share International, and it was published, entitled Healing Oneself of AIDS. And we'll have a link to that on the Facebook page. I interviewed a woman by the name of Nero Assistant, who was leading workshops for people with AIDS. She had her own personal experience of reversing her HIV diagnosis by preparing to die. She thought, I have the virus. They say I will die, so I'm going to prepare to die. And she made choices that were based on what's the best way for me to live in this moment. And that might have been being with friends. It might have been, let me enjoy the solitude of a stroll on the beach. She ate the healthiest foods she could. She wanted to die in a beautiful body. The reverse happened. In preparing to die, she healed herself. Her story is extraordinary. There was a book written by George Melton about his experience of healing and his partner's experience of healing. They both approached it differently, but incorporated alternative healing, visualization, prayer, meditation. And in the article that we have a link to, you'll see a description of what Nero Assistant experienced in a moment of healing, a very profound moment of healing. She met who she called her master as she was strolling on the beach. That master as it turns out, was actually Maitreya appearing to her. Maitreya has appeared to many ordinary people to provide comfort, to provide healing, to provide insight. Maitreya has appeared to people in the most profound moments and in the most mundane moments. Maitreya appeared to me. I feel self-conscious in sharing this story. And we have a project of assembling some audio and video of Maitreya and people's stories of Maitreya, encounters with Maitreya. We're working on that project. But Maitreya appeared to me as a homeless man in the New York Public Library. And he was playing... I'm pausing. I feel very self-conscious telling this story because it's kind of long to tell the whole story. Maybe I'll tell it on another show. I don't mean to dine and dash or whatever we call it here. But I will share this about my experience of Maitreya. And I'm sure if you have experienced Maitreya, you would know it. It's so profoundly simple. It's not. My experience was of a very simple man, a simple, humble, modest man with a beautiful chuckle. All he did was chuckle. He didn't say a word. I thought he didn't understand English, but he knew everything I was saying. And I videotaped him in the library. And he did various things for the camera, like clipping his hair and playing a flute. He didn't play it out loud because he respected the library rules. But this represented the story of the appearance of Krishna depicted with black skin playing or carrying a flute. And I recognized him as Maitreya the moment he pulled out that flute. I was too shy to say, "Are you Maitreya?" I just knew it. I didn't have to ask. There's many, many stories like that. We'll be right back after the break. Thank you for listening. Join us after the break.
Free your mind. Expand your soul. OMTimes Radio. IOM FM. The number one reason girls drop out of school in sub-Saharan Africa is lack of access to feminine hygiene products. The Pads for Schoolgirls Project, an outreach of Humanity Healing International, is changing this paradigm by setting up sewing programs at schools, teaching girls a vocational skill, while producing the reusable pads that help keep them attending classes. The girls pay it forward by making and giving pad kits to other girls in need. To learn more, visit humanityhealing.org. Humanity Healing is where your heart is.
Hi, I'm Kelly Fox, host and astrologer of The Astrology Show. Each week, I'll give you access to the current transits, which are a valuable tool that provide astrological information to help unlock the potential each of us has. Understanding the stars can help steer us in the right direction to make better informed choices. So if you're wondering what's going to happen in your week ahead, be sure to tune in to The Astrology Show for guidance. Mondays at 9 p.m. Eastern Time.
Are you on a spiritual path and want a quick reference guide? Look no further. The booklet Ageless Wisdom Teaching introduces key spiritual concepts, including reincarnation, meditation, and initiation. Download the book free online. Visit shareontheairradio.org for details. That's shareontheairradio.org. shareontheairradio.org.
Hi, this is Carly Simon for Lifebeat. The music industry fights AIDS. The AIDS crisis isn't over. There have been amazing scientific breakthroughs, but people are still dying, and your local AIDS organization needs your help more now than ever. Volunteer and make a difference.
Share a quote from Maitreya, from one of his messages. Each man is a lighthouse and sheds abroad his light for his brother. Make bright your lamp and let it shine forth and show the way. All are needed, every one. No one is too small or young to take part in this great plan for the rescue and the rehabilitation of our world. Resolve to do this and be assured that my help will not be withheld. I want to share that just because I've been doing this for 28 years, it doesn't make me any more advanced or special. If you're just hearing this now and you are looking up transmissionmeditation.org and you're looking for a group that's near you to start meditating, you have as much access to Maitreya's help as I do. In fact, let's post on Facebook the image of Maitreya's hand. I haven't even talked about the miracles, countless miracles. We can find story after story on share-international.org. share-international, spell it out, .org. And if you look at Maitreya's hand, you invoke his energies, you can make a request for help, for healing, and a response will come within the law of karma. It's a very powerful way to be close to Maitreya. That's the closest we can come to his heart, by invoking his energy through the image of his hand. One can invoke Maitreya's energy by saying his name, heartfelt, in a heartfelt way. We're in the last segment of the show. There's so much I want to share. I want to talk about 9/11. And I was living in New York City at the time, so I certainly experienced all the things that happened on that day and the subsequent days after. And I'm going to read a letter that was published in the November 2001 issue. So 2 months later, this question came in regarding 9/11. Question: with the horrible event of the terrorist attack on America, I believe Americans and indeed the world will find it hard to swallow the bright picture you portray in your books, meaning Benjamin Creme, and discussions of our future. I think I speak for many who follow Maitreya, whose hearts are crying out, why aren't you coming forward now with immediacy? I think the followers of Share International need the precise answer or answers to this question now. Please clarify this. Answer from Benjamin Creme. Maitreya is as anxious to emerge as people are to see him. However, he is bound by laws and forces which he alone understands. We can be sure that he is not standing idly by, but is guiding humanity, where possible, in the right direction. I believe that you will find the general vision for our future, which I portray in my books and lectures, again, this is from Benjamin Creme, to be correct and accurate. This catastrophe, while sad, unexpected, and dramatic, will have a positive effect in showing that no nation is invulnerable, that isolationism is no longer an option, and that we live in one interdependent world where the resources must be shared more equitably, thus ensuring peace and an end to the despair and resentment that lead to terrorism. I'm also a political activist. And what I appreciate so much from the education that I'm getting, working with the people here in Seattle to win $15 an hour minimum wage, working on the various campaigns, is a very rigorous study of, in my activist group, they wouldn't call it cause and effect. But in our esoteric circles, we call it the law of cause and effect. And what happens in the world politically and economically is a reflection of our spirituality, the condition of our spirituality. And I so appreciate understanding the esoteric perspective of what's happening in the world and the exoteric perspective that I'm getting from being in my activist groups. One group, actually. And so, you know, being involved in this work of sharing the information of Maitreya, the World Teacher, it is not passive. It's not about waiting around for Maitreya to emerge. When's he going to show up? Like waiting for the bus. That's not what this is for me. It's about, for me, the desire to understand, the need to understand as clearly as possible what is happening in the world. What can I do with the resources I have to participate in change? Changing the world, transforming the world. We know we have to do this if we're being called to it. And I have to take action when I'm feeling called. And I have to set aside a lot of things. That's just what we do. We set it when we choose to do something, whether you're an Olympic athlete or you're an activist. We make a choice of where we direct our time, our energy, our money. And there are things that don't happen because we're focused in a particular direction. Sacrifice is involved. We don't like that word sacrifice. And in fact, you know, taking time to prepare a podcast and get my ideas together, to work with the guest, to work with my co-host, Diana, to work with my producers, Francis and David, that's a commitment I happily make. And I could be, I don't know, playing wiffle ball in the park, and I do play wiffle ball in the park. It may not happen every weekend, but I get it in somewhere. So there is joy and relaxation in life, and also there is an urgency of the time. And remembering back to my sense of, as a teenager, a sense that something special is happening in the world. Thinking back to that, thinking that today a young person may be thinking that as well. A young person, or even an older person, may be hearing this information and deciding to explore it online, exploring the books, reading the books, exploring what's available online. It may have a profound effect of helping that person make different choices with their time and their money and their energy and who they're interacting with and what is important. And to respond to this story is to respond to the promptings of the soul. And the purpose of the soul is to serve. So to respond to the story means making the choice, having the choice in front of me to be of service. And that's a luxurious choice to make, I think. There's so much that I'm not covering. The miracle survivals, maybe I'll share this very quick. It was about a fireman in 9/11, stuck underneath rubble after the World Trade Center attack. He couldn't move and thought he would die. Suddenly a torchlight flashed nearby, and he heard a voice saying, "Grab hold." He got hold of an arm and was pulled up. Someone behind him supported him, and he realized he was in a human chain of people escaping. When he got out into safety, he looked for the man with the torch, but he was nowhere to be seen. He has since called the man who saved him his light angel. And Benjamin Creme, in this November 2001 issue of Share International, states that the fireman was saved by the Master Jesus. The Masters are there. Maitreya released blessing energies after 9/11 to relieve the shock, the anxiety that people were feeling worldwide, to comfort, to bring comfort to people. People were experiencing that energy. I remember New Yorkers were nicer right after 9/11. It was written in the news. They were honking less. I noticed, people were holding doors for each other and saying, I would say, excuse me in the store, and people would say, oh, that's okay. Like, New Yorkers don't stop to say that's okay. I want to wrap up. We're in our last 2 minutes. To me, this experience of sharing this story is not about, I don't feel like I'm waiting for something to happen. The day of declaration where Maitreya will present his proposal to humanity via network satellites, that will come. I'm not impatient for it. There's so much to do already, to be busy working to remake the world, to bring about justice in my community. There's enough to do. I don't feel like I'm waiting. The fight for women to secure the right to vote in the U.S. took 75 years. 75 years. You just keep fighting for justice. And we're not fighting alone. We just keep fighting for as long as it takes, because that's what we deserve as humanity. And we have help. So if you're inspired to fight, look where you can serve. The problems of mankind are real but solvable, Maitreya says. The solution lies within your grasp. Take your brother's need as the measure for your action and solve the problems of the world. There is no other course. Thank you so much. And join us again next Sunday, live, 1 p.m. Share on the Air Radio on OMTimes Radio. Thank you so much for listening.